Power systems. I love them, don't you? Because of what I normally talk about on my channel, I don't exactly get a chance to talk about them very often, though some kind of dive into the Owl House's magic system could actually be pretty fun in the future. Okay, focus. When it comes to a lot of power systems, particularly in anime, there's more often than not going to be tropes that appear within. Of course, a classic is the guy that can just punch really hard and not much more in this world of weird and wacky powers. Often the main character, but not always. Then you have your elemental powers, fire and ice and electricity. Blood seems to be a pretty popular one at the moment too. You've got your healers, your shapeshifters, your illusionists, the list goes on. But we're not here to talk about those today. No, we're focusing on a very particular facet of the power system. One that, as we're about to discuss, can be agonisingly tricky to make work in a story, yet seems to pop up again and again. Then again, I suppose it's pretty clear why it keeps popping up. Because it's awesome. The Power Stealer. What's that? You're a person in this universe who has an awesome ability? Wow, that really is an awesome power. Mine now. It's the equivalent of asking the genie for more wishes. And when it works, oh, it can help create one of the coolest characters of a story. And when it doesn't, let's talk about power stealers. Specifically, what I'd deem the big four: All For One, Kenjaku, Crollo Lucifer, and Enrico Pucci. And with that, I'd have to say, of course, major spoilers, anime and manga, for My Hero Academia, Jujutsu Kaisen, Hunter x Hunter, I know it's pronounced Hunter, but come on, give me this one, and JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Stone Ocean, respectively. It goes without saying, you should click away if you want to avoid spoilers for any of those, but like, while you're on your way out, it wouldn't be terrible if you could hit the like button, or even if you're going to stick around too, if that works. Anyway, now here's the thing, I like All For One. He's been the punching bag of the My Hero Academia fanbase for the past few years now, but I see the vision. I appreciate just taking that pure evil irredeemable villain and nothing more trope and just cranking that baby up to 12. And I know plenty of others do, maybe a little too much. Still, he is such an utter piece of shit and absolutely owns it. It derails a little when he possesses Shigaraki, a fascinating character who I have definitely not made a badly aged video on, please don't watch it, but today we're discussing AFO, his power set, and how it works in the story in comparison to the other power stealers here. Because, yeah, All For One is going to have to serve as a baseline, a perfect comparison on how not to write a power stealing character. For those of you who don't know, All For One's quirk, his superpower, is, well, All For One. And it's pretty simple. If he touches someone, he can steal their power or give them a quirk from his own stockpile. That's it. Little to no limits. It is mentioned that his body does have a vague maximum number of abilities, but the number never even comes close to being revealed, and all that's required is a single touch. In a story like My Hero Academia, with dozens of characters, several with extremely powerful abilities, are you starting to see the problem here? Of course, this ease of use thing isn't only shared by AFO. Pucci has essentially the same, very simple requirements. Unfortunately, when it comes to All For One, it only gets worse when combined with his role in the story and his personality. You see, he's the Demon Lord, the Shadow King, the grand evil mastermind who has essentially ruled Japan with an iron fist for decades, and has been working behind the scenes to ensure the downfall of Hero Society and his own grand return for decades more. He has puppets on 1,000 strings, he has well-respected head doctors of hospitals and spies within hero schools, which inevitably begs the question, why doesn't he have better abilities? Really, how does he not have several of the most powerful powers in the verse? It's not like these accusations are indefensible. I've seen a few attempts. But, and I say this as someone who loves My Hero Academia and All For One, you can't just give a villain nigh infinite abilities, nigh infinite resources, decades of time, and not expect your audience to question why he didn't do certain actions when he ends up looking like a fool. Why didn't he try to take Erasure again? Why didn't he try and take Overhaul? Or Kurogiri's teleportation, the far superior warping? Or any other hypothetical busted quirk to steal? The other universes compensate for this potential issue in a variety of ways. Hunter x Hunter's Cruel has multiple steps and restrictions on his stealing ability, a far cry from literally just having to touch someone. And because of this, it makes anyone whose powers are worth a damn to steal an uphill battle for the Nen Master. We only ever see him actively take someone's ability once throughout the decades-long series, and it's a complete non-combatant that it happens to. Honestly, I'd love to see it happen just one more time before Hunter x Hunter's over, this time in a proper fight. Anyway, the other one of note, we'll get to the goofy silly man in good time, is Pucci. Now, you might think this could be just as big an issue because his conditions are just like All for One's. That being, he doesn't really have any. He touches you, boom, your stand is in a disc, and your memory is too for good measure. But this series has a pretty simple sidestep. Stand users just aren't a public thing in the JoJo world, even completely disregarding the problem of resources in comparison to someone like AFO. Is genuinely impressive that he has as many stand discs as he does, because of how many stand users are just normal guys. Okay, normal for the JoJo universe anyway. But I feel like we're beating around the bush a wee bit here. Alright, yes. Certain abilities in certain circumstances in certain worlds are a lot more powerful than they perhaps should be, but right now everything has been speculative. So what about how they're actually used in the narrative? Well, that's where the bread and butter lies here, my friends, as well as the major problem you're going to encounter if you're trying to write a power stealer of your own. Yes, that's right, we've not even touched on the major problem yet. To be blunt, it's the unknown. Wow, yeah, you can tell when this script was written. Jesus. I was worried I was going to have to use All for One as another negative example here, but I realised this is actually the perfect place to talk about Kenjaku, as this is a major potential issue for the two of them. For those of you ignoring the spoiler warning for JJK, well, Kenjaku has the ability Cursed Spirit Manipulation, which basically makes him a Pokemon champion in a world where Pokemon can't be tamed by anyone else. Now, how many do you think he's said to have at his disposal during the story? I know I just called him a Pokemon champion, but it ain't 6, I'll tell you that much. 16? 60? 600s? More like in the millions. He has millions. It's a rather extreme example, but it gets my point across. He has this many cursed spirits at his disposal. Many of them have their own different abilities to boot. So the question becomes, how on earth do you write a satisfying fight with this kind of character? It's going to be very tricky to write them to decisively lose, because like, seriously, with all of these different powers at your disposal, you really couldn't scrape a W? But the worst outcome is, believe it or not, if they win. Because if you have a character whose focus is on having so many different powers and abilities at their disposal, they're likely going to have some way of overpowering or even negating their opponent's abilities, right? And it can feel like the most ridiculous Deus Ex Machina bullshit for a character to pull a new power out of nowhere that just so happens to counter another person's power set. If you've read Jujutsu Kaisen, you know where I'm going with this, but let me take a quick detour and talk about a couple of the ways that this has been overcome. Surprisingly, one of these ways is also Jujutsu Kaisen. Yep, they were so close. Basically, Kenjaku only really has 2 big fights throughout the series. Yeah, he has this cool little spar with Choso that's entirely anime only, pretty much, but the real deal battles are with Yuki and Takaba. Do you know the important similarity between these 2 battles? His opponents are the only ones out of the entire series that can, with ease, one-shot any and every cursed spirit that comes their way. Yes, including Gojo and Sukuna in this too. Kenjaku is very deliberately put up against the 2 opponents in the series that can feasibly one-shot literally any monster he's able to throw out, forcing him to fight with his own body. I won't deny that it's a very brute force way of dealing with the problem, figuratively and literally, but hey, it works. And seriously, hey, what else are you supposed to do with a character who has nigh infinite levels of potential powers at his disposal? The answer comes in the form of Chrollo. Now, again, this metalhead looking pasty goth man only has 2 on-screen fights across his series so far, and this time there's no asterisk. And the issue of Deus Ex Machinas and plot armor and aspills are completely negated by a single detail. he explains exactly what he's going to do. In both his fight against the Zoldyck assassins and his arena brawl with Hisoka, he either explains the abilities he's using and what they do before the fight begins, or their powers we've seen used previously. By limiting Chrollo's power set so heavily, he uses exactly one Nen ability against the assassins and nothing more. You might upset the power scalers, boo fucking who, but it makes for a far more compelling narrative. Then you have someone like Pucci and Whitesnake, who, I just want to say, is probably one of my favourite main JoJo villains. I feel like Bro's pretty underrated. However, I've already explained how I like aspects of how his abilities are handled, but then you have moments like his fight versus FF. To quickly summarise, he's fighting this sentient massive plankton, no don't worry about it, who's just trying to escape him. To make their getaway, they need to reach water. They do, and it turns out, it's boiling water. Because Pucci has access to a sand that can boil water. It's never shown before, it's never shown after, we know no other details about it other than the fact that its ability can boil water. No, just no. I expected All For One or Kenjaku to be the big stop everything, what were they thinking moment of this video, but no, do not do this. Never do this. In a series like JoJo, which I think does battles exceptionally well, this is a very rare but very big fumble. And this is what allows the villain's evil plan to go off without a hitch. This is incredibly important. It's a care package from the writer. It's dressed up luck and a little more. Do not do this. And speaking of whom, yeah, it's time to talk about Kenjaku versus Yuki, because it's almost as bad as this. I say almost like it's better, it's really not. To those of you who don't know, Kenjaku actually has more abilities than just manipulating cursed spirits. Specifically, he can apparently use the power of any body he has taken over in the past, because he can take over bodies. Just roll with it. The ability in question here is anti-gravity, gravity manipulation, whatever you want to call it, which is revealed in the very same battle that it becomes essentially the only thing that can save his ass from someone whose ability can create a black hole. I'm going to be completely honest and say I did not understand a word of what this guy was waffling about and how he explained how he survived. If someone does, please let me know in the comments, that would be nice. But even if I did perfectly understand about how technique lapses and using a body as a domain works, the fact that this is so underwhelming as a climax to a battle between two of these special grades in the verse, just makes Kenjaku look like he got stupidly lucky, despite how much the series tries to play off it like skill or experience being what wins him the day. For example, while Chrollo doesn't show off any of the abilities he uses against Hisoka in the battles beforehand, none of those abilities are complete counters to Hisoka's powers at all. It makes things much more satisfying to read. While Gege can write a damn good fight, this was most certainly a miss from the funny Catman. And yes, I understand that Yuta is probably a better example of what I'm talking about here. Kenjaku just seems to fit much better with the mastermind villain trope that commonly has this kind of power. So, when it comes to writing power stealing characters, how do we best handle it? First, foreshadowing, foreshadowing, foreshadowing. Do your very best to not introduce random abilities out of nowhere, especially if they just so happen to hard counter the opponent of your power stealer. If you really want to have their powers be a surprise, at least have it be something they have to be creative with to win. Second, limits. Everyone talks about how flaws are key for when it comes to writing characters personality-wise, and in my opinion, the same is true for powers. Give them some kind of limits, either in the power itself or in the character, and their personality or potential reach. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, make it interesting, for the love of God. If you're going to have a character like a power stealer in your world, use their powers to the best of your abilities. Combine things, get wacky with it. It can be as simple as using superhero flames to ignite superhero slime, or as complicated as all that shit fuckery Chrollo was doing during the Hisoka fight. Don't just have them use the same two abilities over and over again, if you can. With that, I shall now fortify my house from assault against all three All For One fans, and see the rest of you next time. Thank you for watching, it's great to be back.